Good afternoon, Shobhan, and welcome to Design Dialogues hosted by Rethinking the Future in collaboration with Publish. This is your host, Bhavya, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Shobhan, one of the co-founders of ADND Studio. Just to give a brief introduction about your studio, ADND is a design studio based in Mumbai where structure, precision meet artistic expression. Founded by Shobhan and Anand, the studio thrives on the synergy of contrasting ideologies. With over 2 decades of experience, AD&D specializes in creating bespoke, innovative design across various scales and project types. AD&D delivers meaningful spatial experiences, blending meticulous process with creativity and precision. Thank you for joining us today. Before starting the questions, I would like to inform you that this interview will be published on the website of Publish. So sign up on the Publish website and you'll get access to watch this interview. So shall we proceed with the questions?
Yes, please.
So talking about design philosophy, your studio AD&D design philosophy focuses on timelessness. So how do you ensure that each project remains relevant over the years and especially as the design trends is evolving day after day?
I think both Anand and many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, when we came together, I think there was this inert urge in us to say that, we don't want to follow any particular trends and we don't want to be boxed into what we would like to call as a particular signature style. We genuinely believed that creativity has room to kind of evolve. And because it has room to evolve, and as personalities also we like to evolve, we said that, how do you kind of put a shelf life to design, and how do you put a shelf life to an individual entity? It's very difficult. And the thought process started by saying that, if we are constantly evolving as individuals and as creatives, and as our projects also will have a far greater, I would call as a lifeline, it wouldn't be fair for them to be kind of subjugated to a particular time frame. And hence the idea was that, how do we kind of navigate that? And the idea of timelessness at that point in time, that word was something that was not very clear to us. But we were very clear that, we didn't want to be bracketed. Over a period of time, as our work evolved, we kind of realized that there was a certain sense of timelessness to the work. And that came as a feedback from a lot of the patronage in terms of clientele as well as peers and people who are kind of critically looking at our work, and they felt that our work was kind of transgressing time boundaries. So that was kind of very heartening because it started off consciously, but I think it was being recognized more and more by individuals. So yeah, I think timelessness for us has been one of our key mantras of philosophy at ADND, and it's something that we are very conscious of. We in fact at the studio are constantly telling the staff that let's not fall into the traps of social media and trends and everything that's Instagrammable and catchy. I don't think we should be following into that because with that the goalpost is ever shifting and changing. And the thing about philosophy is that if your philosophy is strong, it's pretty much rooted. I love the analogy of a lighthouse. Um, yeah, ships revolve around the lighthouse. The lighthouse doesn't revolve around the ships. And I think somewhere your philosophy needs to be like the lighthouse. It needs to be kind of very rooted and fixed, like a North Pole, and allowing the storm and the waves and, the ocean and the ships, which can be the analogies of trends and, all the other disruptions that happen around you, to kind of keep going around you and not you don't get distracted. So I genuinely believe that one of the philosophies was about timelessness. I mean, of course, there are other ones that we also highly follow, but this one was in.
So moving on to the next question, if I talk about one of your famous projects, that is Casa Feliz, can you please explain how it has created a very significant emphasis on the concept that is called threshold experience. And could you also explain how this idea has influenced both the design and the layout of the overall house?
So the thing with architecture at ADND, the way we are kind of approaching projects is because we're wearing multiple hats. And when I say I'm wearing multiple hats, we are also the architects and we are mostly also the interior designers on most of our projects. So it's for us, it's a more seamless integration of the inside outside experience. Because it is the seamless integration of the inside outside experience, for us, we became extremely aware and cognizant of this threshold between the inside and the outside, or the architecture and the interior architecture, very early in our practice. And I think we almost treat it as a Star Wars portal to say that, when you move from inside to outside or outside to inside, what is that experience that one is getting? And hence, I think uh, this threshold idea became very omnipresent in all our projects. And we kind of put a lot of emphasis and design thought into it, that, how do we transgress from these different various spaces became extremely important as much as the spaces became important. So it's almost like talking about, the destinations being the spaces, but the journey is the threshold. So the experience of that journey becomes extremely critical for us. So that's with regards to the threshold. But to talk about Casa Feliz, that project has, how would I say, it has given us a lot of adulation and a lot of praise and a lot of eyeballs. And, we never actually landed up thinking about it from that perspective. When we took on the project, I think the only reason why we were excited to get onto the project is there were 100 trees on the site. And the first thought that I gave the client out there was to tell the client that, listen, whatever we do, we're not going to uproot a single tree. And the client was saying, how are you ever going to do that, Shobhan? Because, we really don't have a much of footprint to play with there. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm definitely going to try that. I want to preserve the sanctity of nature out here and what I've been blessed, because 9 out of 10 times we bring in a landscape architect to create that realm. And here we were already blessed with the realm. So our instant approach to architecture in Casa Feliz was that, can architecture dissolve and become subservient to nature? And can nature be the protagonist in all respects? When we started thinking like that, I think all the materiality and the thresholds, whether they should be solid, whether they should be transparent, whether they should be opaque, they all started playing into each other. For example, when I talk of opacity, I think the whole idea of the driveway approach through the beautiful trees, and all of a sudden you come to this fortress like long wall, brick wall, and you just have one massive 20-foot long black puncher. And you kind of wonder that, what would exist beyond that. And the idea of reveal started to play in our minds to say that, that threshold when I cross, what do I want to experience? I've already experienced certain things, buffering myself from the main road, coming to the main gate, from the main gate coming to the main door of the house. Now, what do I want to experience? And that's when the whole idea of this centralized courtyard and revealing the trees and the landscape came into play. And the idea that, how can two thresholds exist together? One is a solid threshold and one is an absolute transparent threshold, like a glass box. And how does that work in tandem? I think these were concerns at a design level that we were constantly debating. And thankfully, I think it all played out well. And I also believe that, the threshold is at some level being experienced. We always refer to the threshold as something which you cross over, but you never refer as a window as a threshold. But the beauty here is that the upper mass, the way it sits, it's almost sitting in canopies. It's sitting amongst the trees. And I think that threshold or that barrier of glass that separates the inside and the outside and connects you with nature is also equally beautiful.
So, as you just mentioned, that this project had a very keen focus on promoting a tropical lifestyle. How did you ensure that this project had a very culturally conscious tropical concept and also in terms of functionality as well as in terms of aesthetics in context to the privacy of the clients?
I'd like to take that question in two parts. When we speak of functionality, I think we speak of what we call as a tangible program. A client gives you a certain brief, you are kind of bound by certain budgets, the site is predefined, there are other parameters that you have to take into consideration. So, functionality at some level is what I would like to believe is a set of parameters that are given to you. The other set of parameters that one goes around creating as a designer is what I would like to say is the intangibles, which are generally relatable to the haptics in design, the sensitivity of smell, touch, feel, texture. And I think when one starts thinking on those intangibles, one starts kind of creating a set of memories for oneself. One starts to say that, I'll use this space in this particular manner or in this part of the day with this kind of an activity that will play out in that particular space. So you kind of realize that, with the sensitivity of the haptics that you have taken into consideration in design, one is now playing out or reliving memories that one would want to kind of create in these spaces. And this happens because there is a certain sense of slowness that one approaches the program, especially in Casa Feliz, because it's a second home that one is looking at, one is integrating, or one is making an incisive placement in nature. So one has to approach it with not so much as a brutal force or an aggression, but it's a little bit of a passive approach, and it's got to be a very slowness kind of an approach. So I think a lot of the slow living factor came into play. And then more importantly, I think, one of the philosophies of at ADND Studio is what we call ADND life. And for us, ADND life is a lot of it is mindful design, which is basically taking into consideration client requirements, site sensitivity, so and so forth, and then designing for a purpose, which is what we talk about in terms of achieving that final realm of timelessness that we want. A critical part of all of this put together is understanding the geography that we are in. A lot of people don't, how would I say, appreciate the tropics, the living in the tropics. We are one of the few belts or the regions where, the sun is beautiful. I do agree that it's unforgiving. I think weather can at times be playing truant. You have monsoon, you have, harsh climatic conditions. But the fact of the matter is, when one considers it with the West, where the sun is far more lower and, it's more duller as a weather. Here we have a sunshine which is far more brighter, it's far more cheerful. And living in the tropics is about embracing that. It's about embracing the fact that you can enjoy nature, but sometimes in the shade. So you can enjoy the sun, but sometimes in the shade. You can enjoy the breeze, but sometimes in the shade. And I think that's living in the tropics. Living in the tropics is about this whole outside experience made comfortable. And I think Casa Feliz was an attempt at that, to kind of say that, how do we live in the tropics, enjoy the tropical climate without feeling extremely uncomfortable because of its severity.
So, talking about ADNG's approach to challenges of creating a unique narrative of each project that reflects client's personality and vision. So, how does a studio get approach to that?
I think this probably would have been a concern a couple of, I would say, years back, where the lack of social media, you were not that exposed, and your clients also did not know what they were getting in. Today, I think coming of clients or being commissioned by clients is, I think, a marriage of minds. It's happening fairly early. I think people are engaging with their designers, designers are engaging with their prospective clients. There is a healthy discussion that is happening as to what do they consider as a lifestyle. And I think wavelengths are matched at that particular stage itself. So, I think the courtship period is determining what I would call as the success of the marriage through the project. So, meeting up with client demands through the project, if one has to anticipate it at that point in time, I think one has missed the boat already because you need to have understood your clients need to have understood you as a personality and as a designer, I think, much before they sign you on. And I think the challenge, if at all, is at the initial stage before you're even onboarded. Because I think once you're onboarded, I think it's a journey of confidence and it's a journey of faith at both ends, client as well as the architect. So I feel that later on, I don't think as designers we have too much discomfort.
And I also feel like with experience come a lot of lessons, and you know what is right and what is wrong when you have gone through some phases of life in terms of architecture. So yeah.
I think what experience teaches you is to genuinely listen. Any successful practice, especially a creative practice, is, I would say, 80% listening and only 20% action. Um, if you listen carefully, and when I say listen carefully, it's not just to the clients. I think we're a practice, I think we're a profession where we have to listen to so many individuals, right? We're listening to collaborators in terms of our karigars, our contractors, our vendors. We sometimes work with artists. We then have clients to work with. We have PMCs to work with. There are so many people. And I think the more you listen and the less of the resistance that you provide, I think people open up and there is a dialogue that begins. And I think it is easy at a dialogue level to steer the ship in whichever direction that you want. But if you start off on an offensive or rather saying that this is my personal opinion and I think it overrides your opinion, I think 9 out of 10 times you are going to hit a brick wall. So I think again, I say it, with my team also, that I think 80% is just about listening, absorbing what is coming to you, and 20% is about reacting. And I think if you maintain that balance, I think there is a joy to it.
Very well said. Very well said. So moving on, in the project K House, given that the existing farmhouse design was very traditional, how did you approach modernizing the space while respecting its original essence?
I think, first of all, the clients of K House are friends of the Casa Feliz. So I think what was working in our advantage, at least, was the fact that I think they saw a certain sense of openness, the materiality, the embracing of natural light and ventilation. And that's something that we are very, very focused on as designers. We don't like artificial light at all. So I think a lot of those tangible physical touch points for the client already had steered them in our direction. So when we went to the particular project, which was a very traditional courtyard house, I think the only caveat that the client gave us was to say that he wanted to retain the structure of the house. So he said that, Shobhan, we're going to retain the skeleton of the house. So the beam columns and the slab will stay. Rest, everything is up for grabs. And I think that for us was exciting because people loosely talk about sustainability. And sustainability is often endorsed by a footnote of using XYZ or some sort of an automation lighting or something of that sort. But for us, a large part of sustainability is to say that, are you able to reuse and recycle and upcycle? Because in today's day and age where there is so much paucity of resources at some level, it is very critical to reutilize the resources as many times as much as one is getting an opportunity to do so. Because houses which were probably living for about say 50, 60, 70 years, today the churn or the cycle of churn has become even shorter time span. So in every 10 years someone wants to kind of demolish, redo the place. So when we got this opportunity of the bungalow, which was just done 10 years back, I think the idea of stripping it down and going carte blanche on the project just didn't make sense to us. Saying that, it's very easy for the ego of the architect to come in and say that, what, I can't work on this and I want an empty site and that's where I will deliver the best. But we kind of looked at it slightly differently and we said that, it's not a challenge, but here is a parameter that you would have to kind of respect. And how are we going to kind of play with the existing scenario and create something which was novel, which was in that sense supplementing its existing state and enhancing it more than anything else. So it's not a deviation of variation that one is bringing to the table, but it's a substantial variation, but keeping the bone and the brick backbone structure same. And I think that's what K House was all about. We kind of went in, we respected the Vastu angle of the project, we respected the skeleton of the project. And then we decided that, it's best served that we look at the project from a long-term perspective of about 20, 25, maybe 30 years and say that, what is the particular style that one can land up creating on this particular project, which will, again, achieve that sense of timelessness. So that's how we kind of approach the K House project with its lower mass, more rooted and grounded to Mother Earth, and it's more solid in terms of, being in stone, whereas the upper mass, though existing, is kind of camouflaged largely by this brise soleil and screen, like a lattice work. So it just feels like a nice, light structure sitting on a heavy mass, and it's just floating right there. So I think that was the approach.
So, carrying on to the same statement you just mentioned, I would like to ask another question. So, ADND often emphasizes the soul of the space in its design as one of the key elements. Could you explain what it means in terms of a practical terms and how it influences your design process in varied projects that you work on?
I wish I could answer this in like one sentence here in an interview, but I'll say that there are a few touch points for us while we're trying to achieve that soul. I think one of the touch points is that are we bringing an authentic voice to that project, right? No two projects of us must look similar. And the reason being that, we all as individuals have our own independent DNA. Buildings should have their own independent DNA. So the idea is that, how do we kind of cater to that? So to bring that sense of authentic voice is very critical. When one is designing, as I said again, one is designing with a purpose. And, it's an engagement that results in a purpose. So, engagement of all the different various stakeholders, when done correctly, will give you a very purposeful design and a very mindful one. And then finally, we'll talk about the sense again, we're going back to the word, but this whole idea of timelessness. All these various factors put together is what brings, I would believe, as a soul to the project. It brings what I would call as a character to the project. And this character is, it's not something one loosely uses or loosely translates into the lack of a better thing coming to my mind is that it's not gimmick that one is trying out here. One is steering the ship in a direction with three, four fundamentals on every project and saying that, you know what, if a project does not meet the litmus test on timelessness, it does not meet the litmus test on engagement for a purpose, it does not meet a very mindful result in terms of a design. It does not have a very authentic voice. If all these litmus tests are cleared, I guess we then say that we have a soul to a project.
So, talking about another project of yours, that is Zydus Cadila, how does the facade design work to establish the building identity in that project within the Santa Cruz neighborhood? And were there any zoning or aesthetic guidelines that influenced this approach?
So before I hit upon design again, I think it's critical to understand what we inherited. So this was a project on a 5,000 square feet land. So we need to first understand what 5,000 square feet is. 5,000 square feet is largely right now a high luxury flat in Mumbai, right? Whether you look at the 360s or the Artesias or any of these large homes, the smallest flat would be about 5,000 square. And that's the size of the plot that we inherited. There was an existing 30, 40-year-old structure on it of the Zydus company. They were using it as a guest house. It was dilapidated. It was just barely having 6 rooms. So obviously very insufficient. And they have a large office out here besides the main headquarters in Ahmedabad, but they have a large office out here with many executives traveling pan India and using Bombay as their, nucleus to kind of travel or touch point from here travel. And every time they kind of have to put them up in different hotels in and around the airports, international as well as the domestic. So we came in at a point where they said that, you know what, we've got the FAR, TDR, everything, and we want to build 30 rooms. So that began the journey, right? Just to understand the density of the program that we were dealing with on a extremely tight floor plate and almost the surrounding being extremely tight, surrounded by buildings, surrounded by marble shops. It's on the service road of the Western Express Highway, extremely noisy, very busy. One rarely can say that, it's got a, like a residential zone generally wakes up and is functioning between an 8 to 7 kind of a format, and it's vibrant. But rest of the night it is rather dead. But in this particular case, because it's on the main artery of Bombay, it is extremely vibrant, the site, in the sense there is all the time connectivity. And we had to embrace that. We also had to embrace the fact that the entire facade is facing the east and the south. It's at a diagonal facing the east and the south, which typically meant that 3/4 of sunlight day, the light was going to crash in onto the facade. And that was something that we were absolutely aware of, to say that, here, are we going to create one more glass facade building that the city does not need, which can trap more heat? Or are we going to end up creating a facade which, in that sense, buffers and screens that amount of sunlight, reduces the heat load, and internally creates a certain sense of cooling? So that's how the program evolved for us. It was rather simplified for us when we thought that the clients were pharmaceutical and, they were basically a generic drug company. And we said that, what better drug than to understand that, they're treating humans. It's a human-centric pharmaceutical company. And we said that, DNA is what we're looking at. The module of a DNA is hexagonal. It's something that is structured, but it's different from people to people, but it's hexagonal at the end of the day. It's cellular, whether it's human beings, it's animals, whether it's plants, but we're all cellular in nature. And when we kind of took a deep dive into the cellular nature, we just realized that, the strongest, most stable shape was an hexagonal shape. And we said that, okay, is there a way that that particular hexagon shape, one module of an hexagon, can be distorted when it is and juxtaposed with each other? So actually, if you now look at the whole facade that got developed, which is in grade reinforcement fiber concrete, GRPC, FC, it is, each module is different. So each cut section of the module is extremely different. And that's why it's a parametric facade for that particular reason. So it's not parametric in what I would call as the Z axis, but every module in Z, X, and Y axis is different. And I think if you look at it from the opposite side of the Western Express Highway, you will distinctly notice as you kind of travel in your car that it's got a fingerprint, thumb imprint, kind of an impression. It catches your eye even when it gets lit up at night. So you kind of realize that the DNA of a fingerprint has been kind of established. To the fleeting eye, it's just a beautiful terracotta screen. But yes, the inner layers of understanding of what we were doing, why we were doing, is that we wanted to create something which had a DNA to the screen.
So, moving on to another design philosophy of your studio, sustainability plays a very important role in varied projects of yours. So, how does AD&D incorporate sustainable practices within its design philosophy, especially in urban projects?
So again, the word sustainability has become a little bit of a buzzword in our industry. Over the last decade, while a lot of good efforts have been made, it's also been reduced to a buzzword and it's been reduced to a footnote. So I think every designer at some level will have to be conscientious and will have to be very responsible when using that word sustainable, because it's not sometimes about the simple veneering of materials that we achieve sustainability. Sustainability is far more deep skinned. Um, I'll just give you an example. I'm sitting in my conference room out here. You see two glass doors behind me. They're made out of metal that we've kind of used from scrap. And the handles are actually made out of the reinforcement bars. The light that you see above me are made from scraps of reinforcement bars. We've used traditional tuna paint, lime wash in the office. I think sustainability at some level is about endorsing materials which can be recycled, upcycled, giving them greater longevity and making them the superpowers of the design. I think when that one particular material or that one particular design element is evolved and stretched throughout the design rather than it just being a limited entity in the design, is when I think one is truly embracing sustainability to a great deal of extent. Having said that, that's to do with interiors. But with regards to architecture, there's a lot of things that one can do by sense of duplication. And by virtue of duplication, one saves on wastage of material. So in architecture, there's a lot of My1 construction that's coming. And My1 construction allows you it's a little bit more expensive, but the ROI over a long period of time, as well as the fact that it's more sustainable, it's a great practice to follow. Also, you kind of realize in urban environment when you're building, especially at site with like Zydus, for example, which was a tight site, there was no place for making concrete at site. So premix became the only way forward for us, right? And one kind of understands that premix from the destination of where it is being made, while it's coming in the truck, while it's getting mixed, and it is being poured. How does one then make that linear process extremely efficient? So, it cannot, just because it's cheaper, or maybe, for example, someone's getting a better rate and it's coming, let's say, 30 miles away, it is not sustainable. It has to be from within a 10-kilometer radius to make projects more and more viable to fit into this whole sustainability angle. So yes, I think architecturally and urban intervention, I think one needs to kind of cater into all of that. A big part of sustainability also is about being environmentally conscious, right? And environmentally designing. So, for example, you see a lot of buildings in Bombay being glass buildings. They're actually trapping a lot of heat. I don't see them as sustainable building practices. These structures, though faster to build, more, how would I say, economical than the traditional way, I don't think they have longevity to them. If you look at most of the good architecture, which is the colonial architecture, if you look at it in the country, the reason why it's sustained for last 75 years is because of the materiality it was used, or the construction mode that they had put into application. And I think those were sustainable buildings. Today also, a lot of the fort buildings that are there are sustainable buildings. They're weathering so well in our climate, as well as, so after so many decades and through so many generations. So I think that's the good part about good architecture, that one needs to be sensitive and one needs to try to achieve, as I keep saying, longevity of life in architecture.
So, as you reflect on your firm's design journey, what do you hope will be the lasting impact of your architectural philosophy on the built environment, both locally and globally?
You're asking me to write my obituary, which I find it difficult to write today. But I can tell you that I think we would hope that ADND LLP would be recognized as an authentic voice when the time comes for us to kind of, put down our hats. One hopes that one has contributed in a positive manner to the landscape of design, both locally as well as internationally. Because I don't think that individual practices alone can make a remarkable difference. I think individual practices will make what I will say is a strong case of good design. And there will be other practices that will endorse these strong cases of good design. But I don't think a movement can alone be formed by just one standalone good design. You need a lot of players in the landscape creating good design. My peers, my competition, all of us need to contribute over a long period of time in good design, because that's when the landscape of design will change, and that's when the eyeballs internationally on us, and then for us to be taken seriously as a profession, will also happen. And I think that stems from the fact of not playing into, again, as I said, not playing into quick fixes or not playing into quick trends, but what I would say is striving for some sort of a very sustainable, long term philosophy for your practice. So one really hopes that AD&D would be remembered.
I hope so too. So, moving on to the last question for the day. What has the journey been like for you and Anand while opening your architecture studio? And what advice would you give to aspiring architects who are just beginning their journey in architecture?
I think it's critical for the younger generation to understand that mastering any craft or mastery over your craft is a long term marathon. It's not a sprint. Even today, as designers, I think we're first students of the craft. We are very much cognizant of failure around the corner, but we're not shying away from failure. we're saying that, we need to embrace failure and we will then move ahead and better and improve ourselves after that. The younger generation seems to be in a hurry. And I think for me, that has always been the worry factor. Uh, Punching in, putting in 10,000 hours, burning the midnight oil. There is no quick fix. I wish there was a Harry Potter wand. I wish there was a snap of a finger available, but there is nothing available. One has to kind of go through the drill over and over and over and over again. And I think that's when you will kind of realize that what one looks at as success is basically one is looking at a certain mastery in a craft that has come to that individual over a period of time. Now, that mastery of craft, if not honed by that individual at that point in time, he will become irrelevant. So, even at my stage, I can't be complacent. I have to continue to learn simply because I realize that, to stay relevant, one needs to constantly keep learning. So, for younger practices, I think I would say show patience. I think this is a profession that needs patience, tremendous amounts of patience. So if you do not have patience, talent is highly overrated. Talent is highly overrated. I think patience and hard work will outlive talent every single time in any vocation. So if you do not have patience, the chances are that you are going to fail. So that's my one singular advice to youngsters if they are listening. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shobhan. Thank you so much for giving your precious time. That was the last question for the day. It was a pleasure to have you here, and don't forget to sign up on the Fabulous website. Thank you so much.